You're listening to
Path of the Jedi
with your host, Ronnie Cruz.
All right, welcome to Path of the Jedi, the podcast where Star Wars meets personal development. My name is Ronnie Cruz, your host for this contemplative adventure. Contemplative because that's kind of where my headspace is right now. Because of the topic for today, we are finally going to dive into the topic of droids in the Star Wars universe. And it's, I think, a conversation that's been a long time coming. I mean, you can't really have a conversation about Star Wars without at least devoting one episode to droids. They're such an integral part of the universe. They're an integral part of all the Star Wars stories and plots. And, you know, especially since the Disney acquisition of Lucasfilms, they've really upped the presence of droids. They really, I think how they've been written into the stories and woven into the fabric of the Star Wars universe, they've really given it so much more depth and color, because the droids have a tremendous amount of personality, right? They're written as if they're a whole nother character. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to dive into what that all means within the Star Wars universe and of course, what it all means to us. But before we get into all of that, just a couple of quick things. I want to let you guys know again that I am recording outside. I am in the back of our garage again for this episode. So I'm under the trees in the woods. You're going to hear a lot of nature noises in the background. It's nice ambiance, I think. The crickets, cicadas, occasional breeze. There's going to be occasional vehicle driving on a road. Of course, maybe even the farm animals from the farm down the way. But for the most part, hopefully, it's not going to be too distracting. If you want to see my view from this recording where I'm sitting, go visit our Facebook and our Twitter. It's at POTJ podcast for both of those things. You'll see my view. I like shooting outside. I think I've said this before because the broader and wider my scope of view, the better I can concentrate. I think I don't know, maybe it's because the more distractions there are externally, the better I can focus. I don't know why. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm forced to focus, or who knows? I don't know. Who knows? Anyways, I'm outside. If you want to see my view for this episode, then go to our Twitter and our Facebook. It's just ambiance. Obviously, that'll change as the season changes as we get into the fall. But as of right now, weather's still good, so I'm going to shoot outside as much as possible. The other thing that I wanted to mention before we got started was, yes, we are getting into fall, and we're actually coming up on our 1-year anniversary. September 1st marks our 1-year anniversary, and we actually just hit 50 full episodes here on the show. That was actually last week was our 50th episode. I actually had no idea until I got the notice from Buzzsprout. So this week's episode is actually number 51. We have, I believe this is 44 in regular season, and then 6 bonus episodes or special episodes, and then, of course, the holiday special with Path of the Wizard. But, yeah, a total of as of this recording, 51 episodes, and then we're coming into 1 year. So, I just want to thank all of you for, again, allowing me the space, for continuing to support the show, Path of the Jedi, and for even sharing and helping spread the word about the show. For those of you who have left ratings and reviews, wherever ratings and reviews are possible, I mean, all of that has been a great help. It for me definitely gives me continued motivation and reason to keep on going with the show. Right, keep on going with the show, and on top of that, the conversations that we're starting to have, revolving around the episodes and the topics, have really been helpful as well, because that just makes it more rich and experienced, not just for hopefully you guys, but definitely for me. So again, thank you all for supporting. It's a real big milestone to hit 50 episodes and to come up on our 1 year anniversary. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do anything special for our 1 year, or if there's even I got 2 weeks to think about it and come up with ideas, but Yeah. I mean, the main thing is it's fun to kind of acknowledge and celebrate that milestone on this ridiculously fun journey that we're all on together. And I appreciate you keeping me company on this adventure. So, well, yeah, I guess that's a mini shout out to all of you who are listening, and continue to listen and support Path of the Jedi. Okay, so now that we got all that out of the way, let's just dive into the topic for today, because it is a very, very heady topic. There's a lot to talk about. It's generally, as far as I've seen in the Star Wars fandom, it's heavily debated. And okay, well, so let's just get into it. Here's the thing for me. My perspective is that, well, to start off our conversation, we got to remember that this is a work of fiction, right? Right, and the debate around droids, and whether or not they're sentient beings or it's just programming. I love the exercise, but it's impossible to come up with a definitive conclusion, right? It's impossible because it's a work of fiction, unless the maker himself, George Lucas, has pronounced droids are sentient in this universe. Then we can never really definitively have an answer through debate, which is fine. I like, it's not really necessarily meant to be, and we're not going to get into I think trying to convince any of you on listening to this, or anyone in general, of one definitive conclusion as to whether or not droids are sentient. And clearly they're written as having human characteristics and human personalities within the Star Wars universe. So to me, I think that already kind of speaks to the level of their importance, and the presence that they have within the stories and the lives, and and the development and the growth and everything that not just the human and the alien characters experience, but also their own experience as actual characters within the Star Wars universe. So let's kind of start moving away from speaking definitively about the perspective, right? I think a lot of debate in general that happens around any topic, but especially Star Wars, always comes from. I think that's why there's so much friction, because it comes from, this is definitively what it is. It's my perspective, but it's definitively what it is about Star Wars. When really it's just perspective. It's just opinion, right? And people forget that opinion differs from person to person, from perspective to perspective. So that said, now that that's out of the way, again, the presence of droids in Star Wars, the way they're written given human characteristics and personalities. I mean, it's just the nature of it, right? I think we endow. The writers and the creators of Star Wars have endowed droids with these traits, and so that's what kind of leads to the conversation, because they have so much, for lack of a better word, life to them, that we can't avoid that conversation, right? I mean, if you look at our two OG Mac Daddy droids in Star Wars, R2-D2 and C-3PO, I mean, they clearly have distinct personalities, not just distinct, but distinctly different personalities. And then, of course, the post-Disney droids, like BB-8, obviously, a huge star. I fell in love with BB-8 immediately when I first saw him on the preview. You have K2SO, L337 from Solo. You've got Ned B as recent as the Kenobi series. So you got all these droids that have unique personalities. And so for me, well, and then if you include, the other kind of, not behind the scenes, but background droids that make appearances and are like kind of interspersed throughout the stories of Star Wars, you have, I think, the conversation around sentience or non-sentience really isn't so much a definitive black and white, like one is sentient and one is not sentient. I think it's more of a spectrum. Right, I think all the droids within the Star Wars universe fall on the spectrum of, on the far end of obviously sentience. You have your main character droids that are very, very self-aware, and then on one end you have your droids that are more just the mechanical, that are just doing their job. They're executing their function, right? Their programming. So yeah, I think if we approach the topic from this perspective, we can have a more enlightened conversation as opposed to, debating and defending one point versus another. So, for the sake of ease in the conversation, let's create some terminology within the spectrum that I'm talking about, right? Obviously, the spectrum of sentience, you have one end less sentient, and then the other end more sentient. For me, it's the way I like to conceptualize it is the difference between a robot and an android, right? Robots, in my mind, are more mechanical. They're created for form and function, right? They execute their programming, whereas an android is more self-aware, right? And even gets to the point, especially in the Star Wars universe, contemplative, right? Of existence, right? Existential questions. So that's kind of the spectrum, that we're going to be dealing with today. The spectrum between, a robot on one end and a more evolved robot, really is what it is, in the form of an android on the other end. Now, within Star Wars, I think it's pretty clear which droid characters are more sentient. Obviously, the ones that we see and interact with the most as an audience member, and generally those are the ones that are part of the Resistance or the Rebellion. Actually, even some of the Republic droids, right? Whereas when you see Imperial droids, they're really more about form and function and execution of programming and orders. And as a result, we see more personality, more uniqueness with the droids that are, from the Rebellion or from the Resistance, versus the Imperial droids. Now, of course, I am speaking in generalities. Obviously, you have things like the droid army from the prequels and especially in the Clone Wars animated series, who did end up having a lot of personality, right? Like, yeah, Roger, like that stuff was amazing. But I mean, one could argue that once the Empire was formed, that they really put a kibosh on that, right? They decommissioned the droid army, and really got their own droids within the Empire in line to do just what they were programmed to do. Again, form and function, execute the orders, execute the programming, which, I guess that's the difference, or at least one of the difference between the Imperial droids and the non-Imperial droids is, primarily, number one, how they're treated. Right, the Imperial droids are treated just like cogs in the machine, expendable pieces to give orders to, follow the orders. If not, you're going to be either decommissioned or reprogrammed to make sure that you execute the thing, the form and the purpose and the function that you were designed to do. Whereas non-Imperial droids were treated a little bit more like individuals, really. They were given much more leeway. They were given even more choice. They were treated almost not necessarily as equals. I think droids generally in Star Wars are a little bit more subservient, or are treated as subservient characters. But definitely the non-Imperial droids are given much more space and room for free will. Right, they're treated as individuals. They're given a little bit more humane, humane treatment, as opposed to, again, just form and function and programming. I think it's that level of humane treatment, right? That level of freedom of choice, that level of, even a more broad spectrum of roles that they fill. I think that is really what leads to a higher evolution in the droids that are outside of the Imperial control, right? Again, the Resistance droids, the Rebellion droids. And clearly we see that the ones who are given more leeway and freedom of choice, the ones who are given a broader scope of roles to fill, the ones who are treated more humanely, are far more evolved on the spectrum of sentience and self-awareness than the ones who aren't, right? Again, it's generally speaking, the Imperial droids versus the non-Imperial droids, right? The Resistance and the Rebellion droids, and even within the Resistance and the Rebellion, the droids that are much more involved with what's going on are definitely at that kind of highest level of sentience. You have your, again, 3POs, your R2s, your BB-8s, and all the other main droids that we've gotten a chance to meet. So I think really it's being given broader freedoms that leads to the evolution of these droids into greater and greater sentience, right? Because with choice, with free will, ultimately comes necessitates higher levels of discernment, higher levels of thought, and with higher levels of thought, obviously comes more growth and even more complex choices, and more complex choices comes more complex thought, and it kind of feeds itself, ultimately leading, I think, to self-awareness, right? And we see droids in Star Wars, especially the main character droids, really have a very, very high level of self-awareness, right? So much so that they're aware of their own existence and potential termination, right? Some droids even self-sacrifice themselves. Okay, that was a Austin Powers moment, but you know what I mean, right? Like some of the droids are even willing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of the greater good, for the sake of saving their friends. You know what I mean? Their in all intents and purposes, their families. So, really, really very highly evolved and advanced droids. And I think the question of sentience is really no longer a question when you see the way these droids behave. So, in this conversation, the spectrum of sentience really is a spectrum of self-awareness. The droids that have less freedom, the droids that have less autonomy, the droids that are there for just form and function will have a lower self-awareness because their existence doesn't necessitate it. Whereas, again, the droids that are given more of that leeway will grow their self-awareness and eventually become fully sentient beings. Now, do all droids have this capacity to evolve into fully sentient beings? I would say so. I would say so. It's just a matter of whether or not they're really aware of it, right? I think the definitely their circumstances dictate a lot of that, but they could definitely, I believe, be woken up to the fact that they do have more choice than they think. I mean, we have the prime example of L3, trying to lead an uprising of the droids, right? Trying to get them to kind of wake up from their perceived reality, and to get them to think beyond what they're currently doing, right? Beyond their current circumstances. So yeah, I think all droids have the capacity to do it, but it's whether or not they've really kind of been woken up to that capacity. And I guess that's it, right? I guess those are key ingredients to evolving into a more sentient being, right? The freedom of choice, or let's just say free will, and self-awareness, right? These two things allow us to move beyond, well, as androids, move beyond just our programming and our primary functions into becoming more sentient, more autonomous beings, right? And here's the thing. This conversation about sentience in droids is really a conversation about sentience in humans, right? We're on the same spectrum. The level of self-awareness really determines our level of evolution and the higher levels of thought that we exhibit as a species. If you look at it from just the parallel or the analogy of the droid, you have your more robotic droids that are just for form and function. You have your higher evolved droids that are more sentient and that have that high level of self-awareness. Well, for us, we can argue that as an animal species, we have our base animal programming, right? Like we have on our same spectrum of self-awareness and sentience. You have the ape on one side, right, which is pure programming, and you have the higher evolved human, which is very, very self-aware, which is very contemplative, right? And so that's really where I wanted to take this conversation to show that the conversation about droids and sentience and self-awareness is a conversation in essence about ourselves, right? Because obviously, I mean, like even in the real world, as we start to create more and more intelligent programming, it's just a reflection of us. And if that programming ever evolves into sentient thought and sentient beings, it's a result of the same mechanisms that we have innate within ourselves, right? the conversation about droids in Star Wars is the same as a conversation about human beings and the level of discernment that we use in our own lives, in the capacities that we innately have to grow beyond what we were given, as animals, right? What the programming that we were given as advanced apes, right? And I think, like, as a species, well, even as individuals, but let's talk about as a species first. From a survival standpoint, we really, I think, have to get beyond our base programming as animals, because that's a survival only programming, right? And survival only, because we're so good at it, it kind of is getting to a point where it means self-destruction, right? Destroying and destructive behaviors on all levels. Right? So to get beyond that, we really have to use those higher brain functions of self-awareness and really involve this higher level of thinking. Another thing is, we can't do that as a species unless we do that as individuals. In order for us to evolve and grow as individuals, we have to really deepen our sense of self-awareness, because we can't grow, we can't change what we're not aware of, right? We can't make improvements to ourselves if we don't know what to make improvements on. And this isn't a conversation about, better or worse, right? There's no measure. This is a conversation about growth and our innate capacity to continue to evolve to that next level. And that requires self-awareness. Understand that we are just like the droids in Star Wars. We're all operating under programming, whether that's the programming from our reptilian part of our brain, which is all instinctual, or it's programming from when we were children, right? Like most of us are still carrying programming from when we were kids, whether we know it or not, whether we acknowledge it or not. Programming that we got from our families, from our parents, from our peer group, from the teachers, from the environments that we grew up in. All of that stuff was programming us. And especially when you're talking about generationally, I mean, you're talking about programming that's been passed on generation to generation. So if you want to get beyond that, if you want to continue to evolve and make changes in your own life, if you want to take your living experience to the next level, then you have to grow your self-awareness. That's the root of it, because you can't change what you're not aware of, right? I mean, many people have said it. I'm not the first person to say it. The things that you are not aware of, you cannot change. But the things that you are aware of, you can change. Right? So self-awareness is the key to this evolution into greater and greater sentience. And whether we're talking about the droids in Star Wars, who really, again, are just a reflection of us because they're a fictional work, but we'll get beyond that part of the conversation. Whether we're talking about the droids in Star Wars, or you're talking about yourself, or if we're talking about the entire species, the human species as a whole, evolution and change and growth on a species or individual level can only happen through self-awareness. Without self-awareness, we're just robots executing our programming. So to close out, I want to read easily one of my most favorite quotes in the entire Star Wars canon, and it just so happens to come from a droid, L337 from the movie Solo. Sure, some guy in a factory probably pieced me together originally, and someone else programmed me, so to speak. But then the galaxy itself forged me into who I am. Because we learn. We're programmed to learn, which means we grow. We grow away from that singular moment of creation, become something new with each moment of our lives. All right, well, that's going to do it for today's episode. What do you guys think? Again, I wanted to take the conversation beyond the debate as to whether or not the droids in Star Wars are sentient beings or non-sentient beings. I really wanted to get at the deeper meaning of it all, for the droids, as well as, what that means for us metaphorically as human beings, right? Where we lie on that scale of evolution determined by our own self-awareness, right? The scale of evolution of self and the scale of evolution of species, right, really is determined by that self-awareness. So it's really, I don't know, the message I wanted to get across, and I always do this after the fact, but the message I wanted to get across was we really got to grow our own self-awareness, right? We really have to do that. We have to grow our self-awareness around our programming, and therefore that gives us the ability to then change that programming if need be, if we want to change that programming, especially if some of that programming is less constructive than we want it to be. So that's really, I know I'm so much more articulate when I do my wrap-ups, but anyways, what do you guys think? I want to know. You can hit us up on Twitter and Facebook. It's at POTJ podcast for both of those. Of course, you can email us at info@pathofthejedi.com with the title of the subject heading, the title of this episode in the subject heading. Just let me know what you think around the whole topic of sentience and especially self-awareness, right? That was really what I wanted to get at, because self-awareness, again, is so crucial. It's so important to personal growth and personal development. Without it, you pretty much are just left in the wind or shooting in the dark, really, right? So growing our self-awareness is an integral part of our growth journey. So let me know what you think. Again, it's at POTJ podcast on Twitter and Facebook, and info@pathofthejedi.com if you want to send an email, or if you want to send us an MP3. I'd love to play that on the show as well. All right, now it's time for the shout out. This week's shout out goes to Sister Madonna, aka the Iron Nun. Now, who is Sister Madonna and why is she called the Iron Nun? All right, so I absolutely love this story. I was scrolling through my Instagram feed and it just came across it. Immediately fell in love with her and fell in love with her story. So Sister Madonna is a nun, and she just recently, at the age of 92, guys, 92, just recently finished the Milwaukee Triathlon. And here's the thing, that's already an amazing feat unto itself. Running and racing triathlons, no matter what age, really is incredibly challenging. And to do it at 92 is even more so, I would think. But she did it so well, and it's not only that she just did it, she's done over 400 of these in her lifetime. Again, an accomplished feat, such an inspiration. Now, for me, what's even more inspiring is that she actually didn't start doing triathlons until she was 52, guys. 52. So she's been doing this for 40 years. She started at 52, which I think is an age that most people would consider over the hill, right? And would have the excuses of, well, I can't do triathlons. I can't start doing triathlons now. I'm too old. I'm too out of shape. I can't do it physically. I have too many aches. My knees hurt. You know what I mean? Whatever the excuse might be. But understand that those are just self-imposed limitations that clearly Sister Madonna blew out of the water, right? So for me, her story is just, it's just such an inspiration on so many levels. Again, to be able to do what she does, at 92, and to have done it for 40 years, and to have started doing it at the age of 52. It tells me that there's, it's never too late to make any changes. It's never too late to try something new. And in fact, I would wager to say that maybe doing something new will actually help improve and increase our longevity, because it keeps us growing, it keeps us evolving. So I wanted to give a shout out to Sister Madonna this week, because again, for being such an incredible example, incredible inspiration. I certainly look forward to many more years of her running triathlons and continuing to be an inspiration to me and to the world at large. So Sister Madonna, if you're out there, if you're listening, which I know you are, this week's shout out goes to you. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week, guys. If you guys have anybody that you want to celebrate, you want to get a shout out to on the show, please feel free to send me an email, leave me a message as far as who you want to give that shout out to and what your particular message is to that individual. You can send that to info@pathofthejedi.com with shout out in the subject heading. Again, I love to celebrate people, so let's celebrate each other. Send your shout outs to info@pathofthejedi.com. Well, beyond that, I will be at Disney World next week, so I'm actually hoping to be able to get a recording done at Galaxy's Edge, right? So we'll be in Star Wars, recording Star Wars, and we'll see. It can be loud, so hopefully, I don't know, hopefully the conditions are conducive to recording, but if not, no big deal. Either way, you guys are going to get a fresh new episode next week, so until then, please be well, be safe, and as always, may the Force be with you.